Hey guys, it's been a pretty wet week here in Oregon, but today it's finally let up. It's nice and warm actually. I mentioned last week that I had a log to saw up, and instead of showing you what this sawmill does, I'm going to use that log to show you how this sawmill works. I've been asked a lot of questions over the past year and a half, specific questions about the mill, and as somebody who used YouTube to research the mill when I was looking to buy one, I'm going to make the video that I wish existed when I was shopping for a mill. So at the end of this video, there should be no questions. But of course, if there are, feel free to ask them in the comments below. Let's get started. Today we'll go over the 7 log handling functions that these 6 hydraulic levers do. I'll go over how the simple set works, what all these dials and switches do, the debarker, I'll show you how that works, and I'll go over the basics of how I turn a log into lumber. Now inside this box is a hydraulic pump, 12 volt, hydraulic fluid reservoir, all the valves and micro switches that operate the hydraulics on the mill. So the hydraulic motor does not run until the micro switches inside are activated by moving the lever. Now it's a little hard to see the sticker. I've kind of mangled it a little bit over the last 2 years. But these 6 levers are pretty much laid out in the order that you will need them. Now I have a log staged here on the loading arms of the sawmill. So first order of business, of course, is to get that thing up on the deck. When you're standing at the saw head looking at your work, the log is on your right hand side. So starting with the right hand side, we raise the log. Now the next 2 levers are for the roller toe boards. These allow you to level up the log so that you can center your pith. Now the next lever has 2 functions. It raises the dogs on the back side of the bed. And once they're raised, the hydraulic pressure switches over to the log roller. This will allow you to rotate your log on the deck to get your first cut going and establish a flat spot for you to work off of. So now we have the log sitting up here. It's in the position we want it to be for our first cut. Obviously the roller arm is going to be in the way if we leave it like this. So the last 2 levers will clamp the log in place. Now we've got the log secured on the deck, it's time to get into what the buttons and switches do. Obviously, you've got an ignition key. This lever on the left-hand side of the control panel controls the saw head forward, stop, and reverse. Now, reverse, you have to manually hold. It doesn't track back on its own. Forward, you press it down and it'll go as fast as the speed that you set on this dial. Reverse is 1 speed. Forward is completely variable. If you turn the dial all the way to 0, it doesn't move. Full speed, not recommended for sawing. The switch on the right-hand side of the control panel raises the saw head, holds it, and lowers it. This is all spring-loaded. It doesn't lock into place like the forward motion on the saw head. Now we're going for 4x6s out of this. So that's what I'm going to focus on initially. I'll save the flitches, set them aside, and see what I can make out of the lumber that's left over. We're roughly 18 tall, 14 wide. So I'm going to cut down to where I can make a 6-inch wide cant out of the center of this. Now to set the saw up for my first cut, I can turn the ignition to the accessory back one spot. And that will allow me to use the electronics of the power saw head. Now you can read on the screen there, the saw is in manual mode. That means all the functions of the saw head up and down are controlled by using the switches. Now this log's been sitting on the ground. It's got some dirt and rocks in the bark. So we're going to employ the use of the debarker. Now I would compare the debarker to a heavy-duty router. It has a flat wheel on it with carbide tip teeth. It's very coarse. And what this is designed to do is to dig into the bark right in line with the blade and kick out any rocks or dirt. It makes a small groove in the bark. It obviously doesn't debark the entire log, but it spins around and it rides down the log in the line of the blade, and it clears out pretty much anything that would be stuck in the bark. Now the debarker is controlled by these two switches here. The top switch turns it on and off, but even in the on position, there's only power to it when the saw head is set to forward. Now the second switch here moves the debarker in and away from the log. Now the switch on the right hand of the control panel will lower the saw head down. Now you have this lever here to manipulate the guide, and you want to open it up enough that the log will pass through, but not so wide that would allow flex in the blade. Now my blade is at the proper tension. It's pretty darn solid, but the tighter you can keep it, the better. Now just like any carbureted engine, we'll pull the choke. You don't need to run the choke for a long time on this one anyway. Now once your engine's warmed up and you're ready to go, you grab this lever. Now by pulling this lever down, you engage the pulley that activates the drive belt inside the housing. And it's also hooked to the throttle cable, so it engages full throttle on the engine at the same time. Now I rode this log over just a little bit more and the bark pretty much fell off, so I'm going to run the debarker on the bare log just so you can see how it interacts with the log in relation to the blade. You'll just have to pretend there's bark on it. Now, as you saw there, the debarker got hung up on this knot. It is spring-loaded, which will allow it to flow with the curve of the edge of the log, but things like this can hang it up, and when that happens, you've got to use the switch to move it out and then move it back in. You can see it does have quite a bit of power. It's probably notched into the edge of this wood, probably close to a ½ inch. When the bark is on, you obviously won't have that, but this will go away once we face up this side of the log anyway. So now we're going to release the clamp and use the log roller to rotate the log 90 degrees. Now the log clamp can be used in conjunction with the log roller. Once I get the log down to a cant, I don't like to use the log turner anyways. It's kind of hard on the finished surface, so I like to use the log clamp itself to manipulate the cant. Now there's obviously a lot of lumber left in this thing. I'm going to set it aside. Right now I have a 6-inch wide cant that I'm going to make 4-inch slices out of, and I'll show you how the simple set works. Now when you fire up the sawmill, it's automatically in manual mode. So the first thing you do is you press the button for the simple set. That brings up your first thickness setting. And then you use the arrows to go up or down to your desired thickness. Now with these bimetal blades, I've found that adding 1/8 of an inch to each measurement will give me the exact measurement that I'm looking for. For 4 inches, I'll put in 4 1/8. Now I've set the blade down right on top of the cant, and that'll be the starting point for the saw to reference for the next cut. Once I start up the saw, I'll push the button for the simple set. That'll take it out of manual mode. It'll start measuring from the current blade location. Well, as you may or may not know, this isn't my first mill. I started out with a Woodland Mills fully manual mill, small, inexpensive. It kind of got me interested in this whole lumber process, and it actually allowed me to step up to this mill. But when I was researching this mill, I had no idea how the simple set worked, didn't really know what the debarker did, and I had a lot of questions that if you're watching this video in the same spot I was 2 years ago, hopefully I've answered some of your questions. And like I said, if you've got any other questions, feel free to ask, and I try to respond to everybody. So hopefully this helped, and I appreciate you guys watching. We'll see you on the next one.